So why don't you fill us in on your background, Holly, so this way the audience can understand like what you bring to the table.
Sure. I'm a behavioral scientist. So I always tell people a BA and BS. And a master's of science in organization development and then postgraduate work in neurophysiology. So how and why do you think and behave the way you do at work? That's my primary little sandbox is the work sandbox, both for cause and for profit spaces. And I help people, organizations, teams get really clear on winning and then get there. So using how the brain really works instead of pretending that we're logical, rational creatures, really tapping into how we actually think and make decisions, etc. So I work with elite teams and players all over the world, including United States Navy SEALs, Top Gun fighter pilots, Olympic athletes, as well as some of the world's largest organizations and small and mid-sized businesses in just about every sector that exists.
I knew there was a kind of a connection between the two of us because I've been studying cognitive science for the last 16 years, but through the lens of evolutionary psychology in an attempt to increase the accuracy of forecasting. And the concept that I came up with was the future. It falls into two categories, the knowable and the unknowable. And it turns out human beings are ridiculously boring. Like my famous line is, the day you buy a minivan, even your car insurance company knows you don't look good naked anymore. And that's as we pursue Darwinian
process data.
So it's funny too, because when I'm doing a key group or now they have this emerging leaders category. When I'm doing key groups, some guy in the audience will go groan when I say that joke, right? And I'm like sorry, bro. That's how it goes. So picture what people will do at different intervals of their life is highly predictable. It's ridiculously so. In fact, I heard this great argument from David Buss. So he's probably the lead evolutionary psychologist / biologist in the world. He's done 300 scholarly articles, and he's written about maybe 24 books on evolutionary psychology. What he argues is it would take an entire culture to willfully collude to stop doing the things they've done in our ancestral past and up to today for 150 straight years, and then we'd be able to move the needle on human nature. So what I love about that is it increases our accuracy of our forecast.
It does. We are predictably unpredictable. And again, we're not logical. We're pack creatures. We are unquestionably significantly influenced by the culture we're in, the culture around us, etc. So we can look back, and this is why history keeps repeating itself in so many ways. And it's why our kids are being
What's critical then is, from an organizational perspective, would you say the leader, he or she, sets much of the culture in the company?
Yes. He or she does, unless they come in after there's a well-established culture, and then the culture will eat the leader for lunch, just like culture eats strategy. Culture... That
happens in government. In government. There's a well-established culture.
Unquestionably. Yes. Yep.
And I think that's part of because my background being in government and the media before that, I hear what Mark does and whom he speaks with and the cultures of companies that he works with. And it's very, very different from the media industry culture, having stints in government and now as an elected official as I have.
Yep. Oh, indeed. Every system produces exactly what it's set up to produce. And the culture is a huge part of that. And
so then how can you be a change agent? I'm not trying to monopolize time. I know Mark has a lot of questions and a lot he wants to get, but I hear something and I jump. How can you be a change agent in any organization, government, nonprofit, for-profit, when you see there's something inherently wrong with the culture? Maybe not all of it, okay, but part of it. Mm-hmm. You need to change it. So how do you recommend going about making that change?
Well, we're creatures that are driven by role models, and role modeling is one of the best ways to change things. So a leader has to use language and behavior coupled and consistent to drive results. We are creatures at our core. Our deepest singular instinct is to win. That's what drives fight or flight, by the way. And so when we can tap into that and use that to our benefit to drive what we believe is the right culture, the best culture, the right behaviors, the right actions, that's when we can begin to shift things. Most people show up at work every day. They don't want to suck, but most do. Okay. It's not their fault. They're defining their own win because there's a void of information. There's a void of communication. There's a void of appropriate role modeling. So we want to win. That the crucial element to driving a winning organization or team, and this is why I love working with elite teams and elite players, because they tap into this and use it so very well outside of the work culture, is to define winning with specificity. None of this crap about we're going to be the most customer focused. Oh yeah, we operate with integrity. All of that stuff is noise. Well, it has to be metrics driven. Metrics can be quantitative and qualitative, but it has to be specific so that we minimize the interpretation that individuals have of the language we use. So every word that we use is interpreted almost always differently by different people. Let me give you a very simple example. Vacation. How exciting. Are you going to Boise? Are you going to Bali? Very dramatically different. But we throw around terms like integrity and teamwork and responsive and alignment as if everybody interprets that and then behaves on that in the same way. That is not the case. So specificity, and that's what I find most often is lacking in organizations that I work with, is the leader has in their head a very clear picture of winning, but they have not articulated it with specificity. So they talk about it, and then the next 8 or 10 people talk about it and add their own twist and their own interpretation on the words. And then as that filters down, it is so dramatically different, not with malintent, just simply by the way our brain works. Right? We take it. Go ahead.
It just seems that the generic and the integrity and the this and that you put into your company cultures, mostly I would say a mission statement, but the specificity is buried deeper in. And maybe it's the reverse, or it should be the reverse.
Well, it's good to have a mission statement. Why do you exist? And it's very good to have guiding principles or values or behaviors that kind of are the guide rails on how we do what we do. For instance, we don't lie, we don't cheat, we don't steal, etc. Right? And then what we call the next piece is destination modeling. Is it Bali? Is it Boise? Very, very clear, so that everything that follows, from budgets to plans to people to competence, have to align to getting us to that destination, right? Instead of just some random vacation, we're all going to the same place. We're all taking the same form of transportation. We all know what clothing to bring, etc. Right? You know, Navy SEALs don't just hit the beach and run willy-nilly killing people. Crystal clear on the mission and the guide rails, right? And it's the same thing with any elite performer in any sector. For God's sake, Taylor Swift knows exactly what she wants to achieve on that stage. Every single element of her show is choreographed to the nth degree. Nothing is left to chance. Things happen. Of course, things happen. That's just life. And it's the same thing with any winning team on anything, but we just don't often do it at work. We're not taught to do it at work. It's fascinating. We are taught in elite military teams, for example, we are taught to do that. We are not taught in almost any other sector to do that.
Zero Dark 30. Great film. SEAL Team 6. They were very specific on what they wanted to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Unquestionably. And they knew the guide rails. You have to have, the guide rails should be your values or guiding principles in an organizational structure, right? We can't leave dead bodies in the way. Not necessarily on SEAL Team 6, but at work we can't, right? So we do have to have the guide rails, and our brain likes guide rails. We love structure. We're structure-seeking animals, That's part of why we are predictably unpredictable, and part of why during various phases of our life we can map those out, right? Because that structure exists. So we're always looking for structure, even when there isn't structure. We will make stuff up. We call it MSU. People make shit up. And we do that instantly. We don't even know we're doing it. And then we immediately move to proving ourselves right. Yeah, but one day down the street, someone removed from my second cousin, it happened to them. It was on the internet. Okay. Our brain doesn't discern between fact, opinion, hypothesis, and speculation. It's all data.
I think the reason why that is because you have to go to school for a really long time in order to be a scientist. Like, we're not born scientists. What we're actually born is really bad lawyers. So we can decide
yourselves right.
Yeah, we can decide too quickly which side of the argument we're on, then we seek only the evidence that proves ourselves correct. So get this, Mike. I don't think that you've read Super Forecasting yet. Am I right? Okay, so that was written by Philip Tetlock. So Philip Tetlock, I believe, is a Nobel laureate out of University of Pennsylvania. He wrote the book Super Forecasting because in the second Iraq War, there was a giant black eye on the intelligence community. So what the Defense Department did in order to encourage innovation in the defense industry was they created DARPA. So it's a if I understand it correctly, it's an award that you win for innovation as a defense contractor. Like, can you out defense the Defense Department? So Philip Tetlock is now in the running for something called the IARPA Award. So the CIA shoplifted DARPA, created the intelligence community's version of it in order to increase innovation, and Philip Tetlock won the inaugural IARPA Award. That's what the book Super Forecasting is about. Fascinating thing, this is the best part of the whole book, was he actually extended it out to all the famous forecasters, all the talking heads, and then studied their performance. And it turns out there was a perfectly negative correlation between how popular the talking head was and how inaccurate they were. It had an absolute negative correlation for accuracy in forecasting. So there's a few things like Holly knows the Bolio brothers. So picture, they're kind of like Vistage's darling of the day, economies. But why don't you tell me what you told me before we started recording, Holly?
Well, economists in general are more likely to be wrong than right. And anyone with deep knowledge in a sector, I always tell clients, the longer you've worked in this sector, the more you know about how it should be, how it must be. And the less likely you are to innovate, the less likely you are to do anything different because you can prove that's always worked, etc. And there was a study done, and I have to go back and look because it's been more than 5 years, but I think it was Stanford did the study. Economists are more likely to be wrong than the average man on the street about the economy, but they are better at proving why they were wrong, at justifying why they were wrong. Okay. And we find that with many things, with many experts that tell us this. You could go back and look at predictive models about let's get political, about climate change, about COVID, about anything you want to look at. Go back and look at the predictive models. Every one of them is dead wrong.
Yeah, there's a thing of
wrong, right? But we're good at that.
So I opened my presentations with a line that I came up with just to get people a little bit more humble, like exemplify epistemic humility. What I do is I have them write down. I've written out most of it in the handout, but I say mastery of the mind starts with moral humility. It strengthens with accumulated knowledge, but it culminates with surrender. And it's surrendering to the fact that we will never master our minds. It was designed in the Pleistocene to navigate the lifelong camping trip that was our ancestors' environment. So we're fraught with all sorts of foibles. So how do we stay in a cycle of epistemic humility by pointing the critical finger in the right direction? And frankly, when a room full of dominant personalities like CEOs, man, what's wild, Holly, like, I don't know if you're experiencing this, but I used to, once I got to about 100 presentations a year, I was experiencing a male version of arrogance where they would yell at me. One person out of, let's say, 8 presentations. So let's say it's 1 in 80, 1 in 160 CEOs would yell at me and go, "It's not like that. And it was always a dude. That, I think, since the Me Too movement has thankfully gone the way of the dodo. Men don't yell at me anymore when they disagree or assume what I'm saying to them isn't accurate. So despite the fact it's been vetted by, tons of people in the industry. I have noticed, though, female arrogance is on the rise. And I'm not sure why that is. So it's kind of an interesting thing to me that when I see it, it's like I had a woman in the Research Triangle in North Carolina. When I asked the question, what's the country that's had the greatest advancements in female empowerment in the last decade? She screamed at me, top row level. She says, it's not the United States. It was like a 10 on the tension scale. So now I use her as a cautionary tale because I wasn't going to confront her. You can't win that argument. So the deal is now I sit back and I just turn to the audience and is like, do you think that woman was open to being wrong? So it's like, how do we get to a point where we're more open to being wrong when, frankly, social media has loosened or let loose these demons in our society that I could go so far as to say I think society is committing suicide as a result of it. We're jumping way too quickly to that we're right because we can find a cohort of people online that tell us we're right. This, I believe, is the reason why the Flat Earth Society has more membership today than they did in 1957 when they were first formed. It's like a special type of stupid, An idiotic echo chamber, let's call it that.
One of my mantras is we're better at proving ourselves right than any other single thing we do as a human. And I have access to more data than I ever have, and I have access to it faster, easier than I ever have. So I can find some iota somewhere that proves I'm right. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if 99% of the data says I'm wrong. And we see it every day in politics. We see it every day in religion. We see it every day, in climate activism. We see it every day around us in a myriad of ways. And it has been certainly volumized, if you will. Social media helps with all of that, unquestionably. And our ability to do it anonymously also is a huge factor.
Yeah.
So I don't have to alienate myself to do this anymore. I can still be part of everything and sort of shout from the rooftop whatever opinion I have that I'm positive is truth.
Yeah, and I think back to what you were really earlier talking about the economists, especially with the Bolio brothers themselves. I don't know if you know this, but they've got a theory out right now that we're headed for a depression.
Well, they've had that for about 6 years, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up, because what I do is I have to remind the audiences, no, the original year was 2028. And then when we got closer to it, they moved it to 2029. And then when we got closer to that, they moved it to 2030. So I'm convinced they're going to retire in 2029. So this way no one can call them out on it. That the argument is really this. So my first book, this one, it's been 4 years as the highest rated econometrics book on Amazon, and it sold 2,000 total copies. Like whoop-de-doo, right? You don't write a book for 3 years to sell 2,000 copies. It's like the bare minimum, right? So what did I do wrong with it? I don't have a scary title.
That's right.
So I just rewrote this book, added 4 chapters on the population collapse that Peter Zion's talking about, and the argument against how the Bolio brothers are actually wrong. They're not right about the ingredients, but they're wrong about the results. And then so I said,
but that's why that is at the core, Mark, is because economists believe people are logical, and so they
correct
on logic and create models. And we're not. If we were logical, we would not buy brand name jeans for 5 times the price of not brand name jeans made on the same piece of equipment. We are not. I would not drink Diet Coke, but I worked at the Coca-Cola company. You're never going to convince me to drink a Pepsi under any circumstances for any reason whatsoever. And that is completely illogical behavior. Right. And I know that, and it doesn't matter. So that's the problem with economists. And that's why Daniel Kahneman, when he wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow and won the Nobel Prize in economics for it, even though he's a behavioral scientist, is because he based on science, really exposed what he calls system 1, system 2. We make emotional, illogical decisions and then validate them with logic. That's what we do.
That's what Jonathan Haidt calls the difference between the elephant and the rider. So the rider is, the elephant is the, I guess what he's arguing is that our brain, the ancient brain, didn't communicate through language. So you don't even know your ancient brain is actually speaking to you. You just feel it speaking to you. That's the elephant of what he calls, and the rider is the neocortex, which does speak to us, that thinks it's in charge, but it can't be in charge because it didn't evolve initially. It evolved later on in our evolution. There's
even now, the surface, that sounds pretty interesting, right? But I would say we know almost nothing about the brain. And so anytime I hear someone tell me, oh, there's a reptile brain and there's this and there's that, I say, you know what? It sounds pretty cool. I think that's an incredible hypothesis. We can't prove it or disprove it. We don't have little robots that go in there just yet, right? And so I think we have to be cautious. And we can look at behaviors or outputs of a human. We have to be really cautious about declaring that we know what drives them.
You know, but just going back to your earlier point, I believe it started with John Locke, that he came up with a concept called, and it was John Locke, and I believe the man's name was Veblen. He proposed, based on John Locke's work 124 years ago, that human beings are perfectly rational. The hypothesis was that it was called the rational agents theory, and it dominated economic thought until I graduated college in 1989. So a 90-year theory about how people are perfectly logical, and the only thing stopping us from making excellent decisions was a lack of access to information. I would argue, not only did the internet prove that the hell wrong, so did Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. Although I would argue Daniel Kahneman's a very difficult read. His research is brilliant. So it's almost like if you can read his research through someone who can actually write, it's wonderful. But the idea is that he's not only was he a behavioral scientist, he's the only non-economist to win the Nobel Prize in economics ever.
Correct.
And what he did was his theories turned economic theories on its ear.
Well,
that was the struggle.
They should have. They should have. It should have turned economic theory on its ear. It did not.
Yeah. Okay.
Because it's so deeply steeped that we still have ITR out there saying the same things that they've been saying. I mean, I can remember working with clients, and I am going to say it was 2012. Everything was going to collapse. Second half of 2012. Oh, then it was second half of 2013. And, you know, if you really go back, and I've told clients, go back and look at the handout you got. Look at the information, and you'll find that none of it was accurate. But this is the same problem we have with watching weathermen. Okay. How often are they right about predicting what's going to happen with the weather? But we still tune in and watch.
Do you know that weathermen actually suffer from a green bias?
Say more. What do you mean by green?
It's a rain bias. So what happens is that it's better for them to tell you it's going to rain when it's not going to rain, because you're not pissed when it doesn't rain. You're pissed when it rains. And they didn't tell you. So they tend to showcase things are going to rain more often than they actually do.
And you know when someone's doing that, when they say, out of an abundance of caution.
Yeah.
That's your trigger phrase. Right?
And my favorite with economists is something called ceteris paribus, where they'll analyze something that's really more of like, it's almost like mental masturbation. They're analyzing something in a vacuum to make it mathematically accurate, and then saying that if all things remain the same, which they never do.
Right.
And so get this. One of my first weeks when I was working at Merrill Lynch on Wall Street, this was kind of 1992, I think, 93 maybe. They rolled out every pundit, every forecaster, every economist. So the stage was just filled with these guys.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm waiting to listen. This is the number one investment bank in the world at the time. And an older gentleman who had kind of been there and done that, a little taller than me, white hair, leaned in over my shoulder, and he goes, "Hey, kid, whatever the majority says we know is wrong." I was like, what? You hire these guys to know that they're wrong? So like that's how inaccurate all that stuff really is. So what I've been doing is attempting to biologicize economic thought. by seeing it through the lens of evolutionary psychology, so that this way we can't predict the black swan events of the world. The only thing predictable about them is that they're unpredictable in both what they'll look like and when they'll happen. But we can predict human behavior because it turns out we're really boring. Were you going to say something, Mike?
Politics. How often are the pundits right about election results? And on election night, they're very good at saying, well, if the trend continues, well, yeah, obviously, man, if the cities are counting, it's going to favor one party. If the rural areas, it's another. But you see that often because many folks in the industry that I've worked in, which 4 jobs ago, I worked at a pretty prominent research firm in Washington. We ran Latin American political campaigns and some in the Middle East. And oftentimes you could predict something, but there's always a black swan event, even in politics. Is there their equivalent of an October surprise? And there's a shift in voter attitudes. But on the economy, what I find interesting is I've been hearing since the end of COVID restrictions that a recession isn't just imminent, it's batten down the hatches. And I hear some very smart Wall Street analysts on CNBC and other networks, Fox Business, that say, well, no, it's not coming because X happened, but it's certainly coming next year. And it's the same song every single time. And I think that erodes. This isn't a government issue, but I'm saying we already have a lack of confidence in our governments, especially our federal government. I think at the local level, there may be more confidence in your local commissioner or mayor than the president, a senator, or a governor. But in terms of if you're watching these experts on television and they don't know what they're talking about because it never turns out or rarely turns out exactly as they say it is, doesn't that erode confidence if it's in a company or erode confidence in the expert class? And how does that impact a company or society?
Well, unquestionably it does. And yet people have very short memories. So if we recall the last presidential election, every single poll was wrong. Every, expert was wrong. And I know some of those. I was in presidential politics. I worked for 2 U.S. presidents 100 years ago. And it's almost always been that way. Now, why is it even more that way? Well, because it's more visible, number one, right? We see information, again, not truth or fact, but information coming to us from multiple channels today. And we can, the algorithms on Google are written so that it's easier to prove yourself right. Okay. They know you, if you will, and everything you see is about proving you right. It's not about diversity of data. It's not about you seeing something that contradicts your current view. It's all about proving you right, because the more you do that, the more comfortable you are with the platform, the more comfortable you are, the more you use the platform, right? It's it's a very self-serving cycle. But what we don't take into account today is everything else that impacts, number one, how I answer a poll. Am I trying intentionally to skew the results because I think that will help my candidate further? Am I afraid to say what I really think because I know I'm being watched and listened to? Right? And I'm not a conspiracy theorist because I think anytime there are more than 2 humans involved, there's no way to keep anything a secret. But that's a whole nother trail of thought. And so we discount all of those sort of irrational, proving ourselves right, being afraid of not being part of the pack, being afraid of standing out, etc. So all of that is just eliminated, and we presume it's all logic. You said you're going to vote for this person, therefore you will, therefore that dictates the result. Additionally,
that's when I jump in all the time and say margin of error.
Yeah.
Margin of error exists in polling, and folks just look, and if a race is right now, if you're looking at the presidential and it's 46-42, it's a tie. It's statistical tie. So I feel
funny is sample sizes on those polls have gotten smaller because speed trumps everything.
Yeah.
Speed trumps accuracy. Speed trumps, everything. Go back and look at any news unfolding, and you can look at that. And everybody wants to be first, not correct. So
like the incentivization is off.
We're so much smaller. I just saw a poll. It was 1,000 people. Well, out of 330 million, that's probably not a statistically significant number.
Yeah, and it's less meaningful when you elect presidents like we do. We have an electoral college. I could care less what the national studies are. I mean, we've had 2 presidents of the last 4 that have been elected by losing the popular vote. So it's all based on the battleground states. But in economic forecasting, where do they go wrong?
Assuming logic, presuming logic, forgetting that we make decisions based on what's comfortable to us, and what's comfortable, I don't mean whether it causes pain or joy. It's what we've done before. This is why people who make the same mistake over and over and over again, and despite great coaching, make the same mistake over and over. Our brain travels well-worn pathways. Whether those pathways lead us to where we want to go, whether those pathways work for us ultimately, is completely irrelevant to our brain.
I think there's two other things too, Mike, if I can jump in here. There's 2 other things too. There's a concept out there called the Dunbar Circle. So this was Robin Dunbar won the Nobel Prize in evolutionary theory back in the 70s because he had figured out that we only ever evolved in small enclaves of approximately 150 people. So we hear global threat statistics and then we misinterpret them on a subconscious small village level, significantly inflating the threat. So I would go so far as to say is our impression of the world is inherently incorrect. And then the news has to tell us that we're right when we're wrong. And then so it creates this negative feedback loop. And then lastly, you had 2 very pernicious things. Like General Dynamics just started advertising on Good Morning America because there's lots of people on Good Morning America that buy killer drones, yes? So they're advertising so that they can have editorial influence over the news organizations. Perfect example of that is the Vioxx scandal 20 years ago. Fox News and MSNBC were radio silent on it because 79% of their ad revenue is pharmaceutical ads.
Yeah.
And the Vioxx scandal is they literally cooked the books, lied to the FDA about the efficacy and the safety of it. It killed an extra 30,000 human beings, was pulled from the shelves. And from what I understand, Merck only had to pay back some of the profits. So this is a very skewed, I don't know what you would call that, but I don't know that any of that's in the people's best interest. And then lastly, Mike, this is something maybe you and I have to have a conversation about offline, is that we need campaign financing reform in the worst way. Because there's a thing called superorganisms. This is our government on the federal level is supposed to protect us from rogue nations, pandemics, asteroid strikes, and billionaires. And yet the billionaires own the politicians.
The asteroid strikes I disagree with. I don't think there's a damn thing a government, federal or global, can do if there's an asteroid strike.
Hopefully you're wrong, because there's one.
Oh, haven't you seen the movie Armageddon?
Yeah. I don't think we're landing Bruce Willis on a.
Well, in 2036, we're getting a really close flyby. So
yeah, no, and I don't disagree with what you're saying, Mark. I agree with that. I just think that there's different levels of government and different perspectives on them. Like, for example, talk about being logical. For example, it's illogical to be an American voter and go to that ballot box and vote for president and not give 2 shits who your school board member or your local councilman is. And I say that as someone who's worked presidential races. I have not worked, as Holly has, in the White House. I've worked with folks that worked for Republican and Democratic administrations. So when they drink after hours, it's really cool to hear the stories. But in local government as a commissioner, I try to explain to folks, my election is November 5th. I, as a local commissioner of 47,000 residents, will have more of an impact on your daily life.
I've heard this, yeah.
Than the president will, than the governor will, than a senator will, because we are the ones that help you with your garbage. Make sure you have enough cops and firefighters on the roads. Make sure we're working with other layers of government. Yet it's illogical because voters want, and you'll see it on a drop-off. If I have 25 of the 47,000 in my district vote, let's say 25,000 will vote for president, I'll have 14 or 15,000 that vote for my race because they just don't care. So that's kind of that's my soapbox. That's what I'm getting on is start caring. It's logical to care a heck of a lot more about your local electeds. Vote for president. We need that. Vote for senator, governor, etc. In Florida, we don't have a gubernatorial for another 2 years, but it's illogical even in how folks behave at the ballot box. They're not thinking logically about their local government.
I would tell you, Michael, they're not thinking. So it's just like people driving and texting. They're not thinking. They're not saying, I'm making a poor decision. They're just not thinking about the decision. It's laziness because the information is all there, readily available. So it's a combination of a lot of different factors, really, again, driven culturally. It's laziness, it's entitlement, it's someone else, it's the mysterious they. Then they're going to decide they will do, it's a fascinating dynamic. And I agree with you that in general, we do a horrific job in the United States with thinking about every single level of government because the infrastructures that get built, oh my goodness gracious, have a massive impact on your day-to-day life. And those infrastructures, like going all the way back to what you said about culture, those infrastructures outlive the politicians, unquestionably.
Yes.
We have, I can use our own county. I'm an elected official in our district in Colorado. And in our own county, we have elected officials on our county commission, but that's not who runs things. The staff makes decisions. The staff decides what gets put up at meetings. The staff influences how a report comes out to be for or against. It is, that's the real opportunity and challenge is these infrastructures. And the United States government is the largest employer. Just the TSA alone is up to almost 70,000 people. And by the way, they even have a union. Who the hell they're unionized against, since it's us, that's the government. I'm completely unclear on that. That's a whole nother illogical, irrational structure that's layered in there. But these are massive structures. These are not things that move ever, perhaps, or if it's at all, it is so minute of a movement that it makes no difference.
I think there's a thing in there about the difference between Occam's razor and Harlan's razor. So if I understand it correctly, Occam's razor is the simplest answer is likely the best, most accurate and most correct. Harlan's razor is never ascribe conspiracy to something you can explain by incompetence. So when you look at a large enough body of people, probably 50% of them are incompetent. Because 50% of all people have a below average IQ. I mean, it's just one way to measure it. But the idea is that when people think, like Michael Shermer talks about this in his books, he's a professor of skepticism at Chapman University.
Yeah, I know it well.
Yeah. Have you met him?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so a really interesting guy. He's written 13 bestsellers on skepticism. His most famous, Michael, is Why People Believe Weird Things. So I think
sort of debunks alien myths and
all that type of stuff. He used to battle on like Donahue and Oprah against like Holocaust deniers, stuff like that. So now I can't remember what the point I was going to bring up. But what I love about his attitude towards things is like, how do we pump the brakes just to make sure that we're actually pointing the energies of whatever it is we're attempting to do? Like I'll give you an example, Holly. This kind of falls over politics, but it's also our ability to incorrectly use research tools. Because I think right now we have unprecedented access to the best research tools that have ever existed in mankind, but we don't know how to research. So I did a thought experiment for my second book.
Well, I would say underneath, we don't know how, we are not rewarded for real research.
Oh, that's cool. I like that.
All you have to do is follow money trails and begin to tease apart why is it we've created this lack of interest in true research.
Well,
I don't get paid for true research. I get paid to prove something right that someone determined there is a grant in place for.
Neat. But there is an argument, though. I hear in you that you're a seeker of truth, and so am I. So are we just odd? Like we're genetic freaks, me and you? or is it like, can you reach escape velocity and find the better angels of our nature in that with that regard? Because I Googled, for my second book, I Googled Obama born in Kenya. How many Google search results do you think I got?
Not very many.
No, it was 1.26 million. And then someone in my audience did the same experiment because they kind of like to fact check me.
Mm-hmm.
They said, and I can't remember where I was. Kind of wish I could, but I can't remember where I was. Chicago, Atlanta, something like that. And the guy said, no, Mark, it's 5.56 million. And I said, okay, so let's do a thought experiment here. Let's assume you're not like me and you. You're not an oddball. You're a normal person Googling Obama born in Kenya. Now, which way do you think that person leans politically? And everybody says leans to the right. And I said, okay, well, what do you think a normal person does with the more conservative of the two numbers, 1.26 million results? Do they read 1.26 million articles or even 1.26 million headlines? And almost invariably, someone will say they might read the first article, but the next thing they're going to do is rush out on social media lecturing everybody else how stupid they are, proving their own foolishness. So it's a weird kind of idiotic feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
So what's that?
Proving ourselves right.
Yeah. So what this really should be is the great emancipator of mankind, because it's a sum total of human knowledge in any given moment. What is it really? An idiotic echo chamber. So it's like, how do we pump the brakes?
It meets our need.
Yes.
And I think until we begin to understand that we have a deep need to be right about every little thing, it's very challenging to break that cycle or to behave in any way other than that. Listen, I'm supposedly this global expert in what's called the ladder of inference, which walks us through our thinking process, how we get to decisions, and of course, how we screen out anything that is contrary to our belief, okay? And we only see what we already believe to be true. And the fact that we have built entire mega systems like search engines that compound that effect, and I still do it, right? I still prove myself right. Yeah. I can prove to my husband we need to remodel the kitchen. It's very simple. I know I'm right. So I'm not sure that we can ever get out of that. However, we can be aware when we're doing it.
Yes.
And there are what I call neuro prompts, quick visits to our brain to prompt ourselves to ponder a possibility, an option, an alternative. I'm still going to prove myself right. But could I, for a matter of instance, just seconds, say, what if I was wrong? What else would I see? Where else would I look? What else would I consider? And in that is huge power. We do have the control to do that in our lives. We have the power over our brain to do that. I have never seen any indication that says we're ever going to be able to break the proving ourselves right. But we can be aware of it, and we can use it. We can use it to our advantage instead of just stumble along blindly doing it without having any knowledge that we're doing it and colluding with it.
There's a line that I heard from Philip Tetlock, the man who wrote the Super Forecasting. He was interviewing Jonathan Haidt, and Jonathan Haidt wrote The Coddling of the American Mind. And Tetlock was doing it for Knowledge at Wharton. It's a channel on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And I heard him say, he turned to Haidt and just said, well, my research suggests. So an outsider, like a non-PhD like me, understands that to mean that's PhD speak for this is a fact. Because they have kind of a provisional truth, like a lowercase t truth. So as best as he can sum it up at that moment, what he said was, my research suggests that you're either in investigation mode or prosecution mode. You cannot be in both simultaneously. So can we stay in investigation mode a little longer than we normally would? We're going to significantly increase the likelihood of reaching escape velocity from that pit that we fall into just by being human beings.
Now, see, See, I'm a big believer in cognitive dissonance, which says we can be in both at the same time.
Okay.
That we are astounding creatures that can believe something and question it at the same time. By saying, why do I believe this? What data do I have? Is it possible there's other data? Could somebody look at this data differently than I am? So I think we do have the ability, we don't have the practice, and we believe strongly we don't have the time.
Maybe the motivation. Because you must have been, just with that, what you just said, you must have been really frustrated over the last 4 years of COVID. There's people making everything absolutely political and then showcasing they believed really, really wacky, stupid ideas just to prove which side of the aisle they're on. So, which is a frustration for me.
Yeah, unquestionably. And again, going back and looking at predictive models and the things we stated as fact that we now know were completely made up and that none of the models worked the way they said they would. And, but no, we don't tend to take the time to do that. We're running on the next thing. We're busy moving, right? Yep. We're not going back and questioning it. They go back to economists, go back to politicians. Why does everybody not trust Congress but reelect them? Right? For 87% assured of being reelected once you're in there. Well, why is that when the polls say we don't trust you? You have less trust than almost any other entity that exists because my guy is good. Right? So again, we're never going back and checking up on things. Time has become this, it's always been a precious commodity, but we have a sense that we have less than we've ever had. I always tell people, you have exactly the same 24 hours a day as Leonardo da Vinci, Thomas Edison, and Helen Keller. She was blind, deaf, and mute. What the hell is your real excuse? Because we have the same amount of time, but the pressures, the screaming in our world to just run outweighs the sense of be right, be accurate, be sure, just to be fast. So it's just so complicated with us wonderful humans. and there's so much we don't understand. And to be able to sit with that we just don't know so much about our brains and how we really work. We just don't. We couldn't possibly know because we're the ones examining them. And we come with biases and stereotypes and predisposed notions. We couldn't possibly truly research accurately.
I've heard that dogs, there's an issue here. Did you lose me there?
Yeah, we lost you just for a second.
All right. Science that dogs are the perfect Buddha. So the dilemma becomes, I think it's actually you open Pandora's box of consciousness. And now what happens is the upside of it is we can outthink the denizens of the forest and dominate every ecosystem on planet Earth because we can deal death from far away and communicate out and outthink them. So we can think in abstract thought. The downside of that is it consumes us in a bad way about us being able to make better decisions. So what solution would you give to the audience about how to get around this?
The tool that I think is probably the most powerful tool in the world about this is called the ladder of inference. It was originally conceived by Chris Argyris and a group out of MIT. It's in the 5th Discipline Field Book. They just are such horrible communicators. Talk about tough to get through a book. But the tool itself, the ladder of inference, takes us from what our brain does with data all the way up to action and how our beliefs collude with proving ourselves right and how we only see what we already believe. We don't believe what we see, etc. And I'm happy to send it to anybody. It's public domain information. So if you want it, let me know. Some way we could, I don't know, Mark, if you have a way to post it on your podcast site or whatever. It's an astounding tool. And I think beginning to think about what we're thinking about, which is metacognition, is so insanely helpful. Why do I believe what I believe? What data do I have? Could it be different? Could someone else look at this from a different perspective? Could my competitor look at this differently? If so, how would they think about it? How does that change my thinking? Really being able to ponder in just a matter of seconds these visits to the brain. you're still going to prove yourself right. That is our intuition. It has served us well since the beginning. It is why I didn't have to overthink when I ran into a saber-toothed tiger. I didn't pause and think, oh gosh, let's see, it killed 12 of my family members. What do I do? I knew, run faster, get a big stick, right? It was a tremendous part of our very survival as a species. So how today do we layer that on? And I will tell you, it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. As a leader of your family, of a team, of a company, of a government, it doesn't matter. Being able to think about what we're thinking about while we're thinking it, I believe, is the most significant thing we can do without going into analysis paralysis.
Mm-hmm.
It's that potential, if you over process, is be one of the most powerful things we can do as a species.
Well, there's two things about Vistage that I really love. One of them is I call it a yield curve of a decision. So you get an XY graph, and you're adding data points to the data senses. You hit what's called the law of diminishing returns at approximately 79% accuracy. So then every data point you're adding to the data census increases the accuracy of said data census, but at a decreasing rate. So if you draw a line through it, it looks like the silhouette of a bullet train. Right? It's called a normal yield curve in finance. And what I'm doing is taking that concept, that illustration, that analogy, and applying it towards making a decision. Because the one thing I take umbrage with Vistage is their slogan. Better leaders, better decisions, better results. I'm like, no. It's better decisions, better leaders, better results. It's what's the underpinning thing, and I think you're really tapping into it. Just want to thank you for being on the show and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. It's been wonderful. Let's do this again real soon.
Yeah. Now, Michael, are you up for re-election in November?
November the 5th on the presidential ballot in my city.
Okay. Good luck.
Thank you so much.
And remember that yard signs and name recognition make a bigger impact on people's decision-making than any other single thing. Even if you're a convicted felon, as long as they know your name.
That's why I'm fundraising and I'm eating the pot.
Working for Trump too. Well, thanks so much. Really appreciate your time. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.